The prime Dark Lord of the world has been defeated, and Sauron, his greatest servant, has arisen in the east with a plan to bend the free peoples of Middle-earth and every intelligent being to his will and under his dominion. Today on My Govannen, we conclude the motives of Sauron. Seeing the desolation of the world, Sauron says in his heart that the Valar, having overthrown Morgoth, have again forgotten Middle-earth, and his pride grows apace. He looks with hatred on the Eldar, and he fears the men of Númenor, who come back at whiles in their ships to the source of Middle-earth. But for long he dissembles his mind and conceals the dark designs that he shapes in his heart. In order to achieve his policy of dominating Middle-earth, Sauron intends to exert his power over the elves, and being able to turn all things devised by elves or men to his own evil purposes, he proceeds in deceiving the Noldor of Eregion to create the Rings of Power. Therefore they hearkened to Sauron, and they learned of him many things, for his knowledge was great. In those days the smiths of Ostin Nevil surpassed all that they had contrived before, and they took thought, and they made rings of power. But Sauron guided their labors, and he was aware of all that they did, for his desire was to set a bond upon the elves, and to bring them under his vigilance. Now the elves made many rings, but secretly Sauron made one ring to rule all the others, and their power was bound up with it, to be subject wholly to it, and to last only so long as it too should last. And much of the strength and will of Sauron passed into that one ring, for the power of the elven rings was very great, and that which should govern them must be a thing of surpassing potency. And Sauron forged it in the mountain of fire, in the land of shadow. And while he wore the one ring, he could perceive all the things that were done by means of the lesser rings, and he could see and govern the very thoughts of those that wore them. Although in the end Sauron fails to master the wills of the Eldar, he distributes these rings to the other races, and with them he eventually influences even the dwarves, and men he enslaves. After his defeat in the war of the elves and Sauron, he retreats to Mordor, contriving new plans to achieve his domination. Already in the days of Tar-Minastir, the 11th king of Númenor, he had fortified the land of Mordor, and had built there the tower of Barad-dûr, and thereafter he strove ever for the dominion of Middle-earth, to become a king over all kings, and as a god unto men. And Sauron hated the Númenorians because of the deeds of their fathers, and their ancient alliance with the elves, and allegiance to the Valar. Now he learned that the kings of Númenor had increased in power and splendor, and he hated them the more, and he feared them lest they should invade his lands, and wrest from him the dominion of the east. But for a long time he did not dare to challenge the lords of the sea, and he withdrew from the coast. Centuries later, Sauron puts forth his might, claiming both kingship and godship over men of Middle-earth, and craving to be king over all kings, and to have a more exalted throne than even the one which the heir of Eärendil, the king of Númenor, possesses. This greatly angers Ar-Pharazôn, the king of Númenor, and he sets sail into the east, carrying Sauron off as a hostage back to the island kingdom. Sauron humbles himself before the power of the king and recourses to guile, his purpose being to seek revenge from Ar-Pharazôn for this humiliation. And for this reason, instead of taking control over the mightiest realm of men, he intends to destroy it. In Númenor, Sauron sets his plan in motion, and disproving the existence of Eru Ilúvatar, he converts many of the Númenorians to worshipping the prime Dark Lord, Morgoth. Sauron had not served Morgoth even in his last stages without becoming infected by his lust for destruction and his hatred of God, which must end in nihilism. Sauron was not a sincere atheist, but he preached atheism because it weakened resistance to himself, and he had ceased to fear God's action in Arda, as was seen in the case of Ar-Pharazôn. But there was seen the effect of Melkor upon Sauron. He spoke of Melkor in Melkor's own terms, as a god, or even as a god. This may have been the residue of a state, which was in a sense a shadow of good, the ability once in Sauron at least to admire or admit the superiority of a being other than himself. Melkor, and still more Sauron himself afterwards, both profited by this darkened shadow of good and the services of worshippers. But it may be doubted whether even such a shadow of good was still sincerely operative in Sauron by that time. His cunning motive is probably best expressed thus: to win one of the God-fearing from their allegiance, it is best to propound another unseen object of allegiance and another hope of benefits. Propound to him a lord who will sanction what he desires and not forbid it. Sauron, apparently a defeated rival for world power, now a mere hostage, can hardly propound himself. But as the former servant and disciple of Melkor, the worship of Melkor will raise him from hostage to high priest. But though Sauron's whole true motive was a distraction of the Númenorians, this was a particular matter of revenge upon Ar-Pharazôn for humiliation. Sauron, unlike Morgoth, would have been content for the Númenorians to exist as his own subjects, and indeed he used a great many of them that he corrupted to his allegiance. Sauron, being one of the minor spirits created before the world, knows Eru according to his measure, and he does not expect a direct interference from him. He probably deluded himself with the notion that the Valar, including Melkor, having failed, Eru had simply abandoned Ea, or at any rate Arda, and would not concern himself with it anymore. When the breaking of the world occurs, the Dark Lord interprets it as the abandonment of the Edain by Eru and the Valar. It would appear that he interpreted the change of the world as the downfall of Númenor when Naman was removed from the physical world. In this sense, Valar and Elves were removed from effective control, and men under God's curse and wrath. After the drowning of Númenor and Sauron's return to Middle-earth, his influence over many of the Dúnedain is so deep that a large number of them keep on serving under his will, the Black Númenorians. For in the days of the sojourn of Sauron in that land, the hearts of well nigh all its people had been turned towards darkness. Therefore, many of those who sailed east in that time and made fortresses and dwellings upon the coasts were already bent to his will, and they served him still gladly in Middle-earth. In the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, we can find a synopsis of Sauron's motives and of his tyranny as viewed by the professor himself. In my story, I do not deal in absolute evil. I do not think there is such a thing, since that is zero. I do not think that at any rate any rational being is wholly evil. Satan fell. In my myth, Morgoth fell before creation of the physical world. In my story, Sauron represents as near an approach to the wholly evil will as is possible. He had gone the way of all tyrants, beginning well, at least on the level that while desiring to order all things according to his own wisdom, he still at first considered the economic well-being of other inhabitants of the earth. But he went further than human tyrants in pride and the lust for domination, being in origin an immortal angelic spirit. Sauron desired to be a god king and was held to be this by his servants. If he had been victorious, he would have demanded divine honor from all rational creatures and absolute temporal power over the whole world. Fast forward to the third age of Middle-earth. The Istari are sent to Middle-earth by the Valar to unite in love and understanding all those whom Sauron will endeavor to dominate and corrupt. Saruman falls into evil, coveting domination. In this matter, Sauron and Saruman are quite similar, and the Dark Lord can perceive much of the mind of the White Wizard, unlike Gandalf's, who is humble. Sauron had in fact been very like Saruman, and so still understood him quickly and could guess what he would be likely to think and do, even without the aid of Palantiri or of spies, whereas Gandalf eluded and puzzled him. But like all minds of this cast, Sauron's love originally or later mere understanding of other individual intelligences was correspondingly weaker, and though the only real good in or rational motive for all this ordering and planning and organization was the good of all inhabitants of Arda, even admitting Sauron's right to be their supreme lord, his plans, the idea coming from his own isolated mind, became the sole object of his will, and an end, the end in itself. But his capability of corrupting other minds and even engaging their service was a residue from the fact that his original desire for order had really envisaged the good estate, especially physical well-being, of his subjects. If he thought about the Istari, especially Saruman and Gandalf, he imagined them as emissaries from the Valar seeking to establish their lost power again and colonize Middle-earth, as a mere effort of defeated imperialists without knowledge or sanction of Eru. His cynicism, which sincerely regarded the motives of Manwë as precisely the same as his own, seemed fully justified in Saruman. Gandalf he did not understand, but certainly he had already become evil, and therefore stupid enough to imagine that his different behavior was due simply to weaker intelligence and lack of firm masterful purpose. he was only a rather cleverer Radagast, cleverer because it is more profitable, more productive of power to become absorbed in the study of people than of animals. In Morgoth's ring, we learn that after the One Ring is finally destroyed, the power of Sauron's spirit is dissolved, and Sauron's own being is diminished to a vanishing point, reduced to a shadow, a mere memory of malicious will, an evil attached forever to its unfulfilled goal. Thus Sauron was said to have fallen below the point of ever recovering, though he had previously recovered. A wicked spirit becomes fixed in a certain desire or ambition, and if it cannot repent, then this desire becomes virtually its whole being. But the desire may be wholly beyond the weakness it has fallen to, and it will then be unable to withdraw its attention from the unobtainable desire, even to attend to itself. It will then remain forever in impotent desire or memory of desire. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one on My Govanen. Namarie.